You buy a loaf of bread for $5. Of that $5, the farmer who grew the wheat gets about 59 cents. Not because anyone shorted them at checkout, but because that's just the farm's slice of a food dollar once you count everything wheat becomes on its way to a shelf. And that 59 cents isn't profit. That's before the farmer pays for the seed, the fertilizer, the diesel, the land, and the loan. Last year, American farms produced a net farm income of about $154.6 billion. That number sounds enormous until you notice that $30.5 billion of it was a direct government payment, not a sale to a customer. Take that check away, and net farm income falls to roughly $109 billion, a drop of almost 12%. So the profit line for an entire industry that feeds the country is being propped up by a program that has nothing to do with anyone buying groceries. Here's the thing worth explaining. Everybody around this transaction feels squeezed. You think groceries are expensive, the farmer thinks the payout is nothing. Economists keep pointing out that the typical farm operation, on paper, actually lost money on farming itself last year, and the government keeps having to cut bigger checks just to keep the sector's income from collapsing. Somebody is doing fine out of this, and once again, the answer is stranger than a simple villain. Start with where your grocery dollar actually goes, because it isn't a fee stacked on top of a price, it's the reverse. It's a shrinking slice handed backward through a chain. The USDA tracks this every year in something called the Food Dollar series. For food you buy at a grocery store, the farm share was 18.5 cents per dollar in 2024. For food eaten at a restaurant or delivered, it drops to 7.1 cents because more processing and handling happens before it reaches you. Combined, across everything Americans spend on domestic food, the farm share was 11.8 cents in 2024, down from 11.1 cents the year before. The other 88.2 cents is what USDA calls the marketing bill: processing, packaging, transportation, wholesaling, retail, and food service, each one taking its layer before the product gets to you. But that 11.8 cents isn't what the farmer keeps either. Some of it has to go right back out the door to pay for the stuff that grew the crop in the first place. Seed, fertilizer, and equipment supplied by Agribusiness ate 1.6 cents of every food dollar in 2023. Fuel, transportation, and other outside inputs at the farm level ate another 5.2 cents. What's actually left over for the farm itself after covering its own production costs was 5.8 cents in 2024. Crop farmers alone kept just 2.5 cents. That's the number that matters, and it's thinner than almost any retail margin you've ever complained about. Now, the input side, which is where a huge amount of that thin margin quietly disappears. A farmer doesn't get to grow a crop without paying someone else first. Seeds and pesticides used to come from dozens of competing companies. Today, 4 firms, Bayer, Corteva, Syngenta, and BASF, control 56% of the global seed market and 61% of the global pesticide market. In the United States specifically, just 2 of them, Bayer and Corteva, account for 71.6% of all corn seed sales and 65.9% of all soybean seed sales. In cotton, the top 4 companies control 93.5% of the market. This isn't a coincidence of good products winning. It's the result of a wave of mergers that turned what used to be a competitive marketplace into a small handful of toll booths a farmer has to walk through every single planting season, regardless of what the harvest is worth later. Rain or drought, high prices or low ones, the seed and chemical bill comes due first. Then there's land, and land is to a farm what the car is to a delivery driver, the single biggest capital cost, and it barely shows up in the sentence, "how a farm makes money," until you actually go looking for it. The average value of U.S. farm real estate hit a record $4,350 an acre in 2025. Cropland alone averaged $5,830 an acre in 2025. If a farmer owns that land outright, they're renting it, and the average crop
cropland cash rent hit a record $161 an acre in 2025. If they do own it, they likely financed it, and real estate debt now makes up about 65% of all farm sector debt, which itself is projected to climb from roughly $592 billion in 2025 to nearly $625 billion in 2026. Whether you rent the land or owe the bank for it, land is quietly the largest bill in the entire operation, and unlike a delivery driver's car, you cannot park it for a week to save money. It has to be paid whether or not anything grows on it. That brings us to the part that functions almost exactly like a subscription service, except nobody signs up for it voluntarily. It's the government payment. In 2026, direct government payments to farmers are projected to reach $44.3 billion, making up nearly 29% of producers' entire bottom line.
Farmers aren't getting rich off this. Purdue University's own surveys found that most farmers who receive government aid use it to pay down existing debt, not to expand or invest. The payment isn't a bonus on top of a working business model, it's closer to a life support line keeping a thin-margin, high-fixed-cost system from failing outright. Take it away, and the industry's income doesn't dip, it falls off a cliff. Now, the part that generates the most quiet anger and the least public understanding, the person actually running the farm. Because after seed and fertilizer and land and debt are paid, what's left is supposed to be the farmer's income. In 2024, the median amount of income that a farm household actually earned from farming itself was negative $1,830. Not low, negative. The typical farm operation lost money on the actual business of farming. The reason farm households aren't destitute is that the median total farm household income was $102,748 that same year, and almost all of that gap is covered by a job somewhere else, off the farm entirely. The structure only works because someone in the household is doing something other than farming to subsidize the thing that's supposed to be the income source. That is strikingly similar to a delivery driver's tip covering half the wage a platform is supposed to be paying. In both cases, the person doing the actual physical work is being paid in large part from something outside the business itself. And layered on top of all of this is a set of forces nobody at the kitchen table controls. Trade policy and tariffs have cut into export sales in recent years, taking away buyers that used to exist. Land values have kept climbing even as crop prices softened, so the collateral farmers rely on to borrow against is growing shakier at exactly the moment they need it to hold steady. Debt-to-asset ratios are ticking upward. None of that shows up on a grocery store shelf, but all of it decides whether the person who grew what's on that shelf is still farming next year.
So where does the money in a food dollar actually go? Not mostly to the farm. Out of every dollar you spend on domestic food, about 11.8 cents reaches the farm gate. Of that, roughly a third gets paid straight back out to seed and fertilizer companies that hold a majority of their market through consolidation, and to fuel and transportation costs that show up before anything is even planted. Another meaningful piece goes to the land itself, whether that's rent paid to a landlord or interest paid to a bank, because land is the single biggest fixed cost in the entire operation. What's left is thin enough that most years the actual business of farming posts a loss on the household ledger, and the gap gets filled by an off-farm paycheck and a government payment that's approaching a third of the entire sector's income. Notice what's missing from that list. Nobody in it is getting paid extra because the food was cheap for you or because the farmer's own labor was valued fairly. The money moves in fixed slices, taken by whoever is positioned to take them first. Land, inputs, debt, and only then, if anything survives, the person who actually grew it. So think about that $5 loaf of bread again. Roughly 59 cents of it reached the farm before anything else was subtracted. Then the seed and fertilizer bill came out. Then the fuel and equipment costs. Then the rent or mortgage on the land itself. What's left is a number small enough that most years it doesn't even cover the farmer's own time, and the shortfall gets covered by a second job
job and a check from the government that's grown almost as large as the industry's own income. The bread was never really the product, the land underneath it was, and the person who grew the wheat is paying, in one form or another, for the privilege of staying in a system that only keeps functioning if almost everyone in it is being propped up by something other than the sale itself.